The movie starts with a young boy named Bernard Garrett. He works as a shoeshine boy close to the main bank in a small town in Texas. The year is 1939, and this is a time when racial discrimination is very strong in America. Bernard does his work slowly and on purpose. He does this so he can listen to the talks of the bank workers and the people who come to the bank. When he is done with his work for the day, he writes down everything he learned in a small notebook. One day, Bernard is near a window and he hears the bankers talking. He finds out how they decide the worth of houses and buildings that are put up for loans. A chauffeur, who works for one of the bank's important clients, sees Bernard listening. This chauffeur keeps an eye on the business of these white men. He sends the boy away and warns him that he will tell Bernard's father about what he saw. Later that evening, Bernard's father looks through his son's notebook. He understands that his child is very smart and has a special gift, but he also tells Bernard that he will likely never become rich because white people will simply not permit it. 15 years go by. Bernard has saved enough money. He moves with his wife, Eunice Garrett, and his son from the very conservative state of Texas to California, which is known to be more open and fair. They go to Los Angeles and stay with Eunice's uncle, whose name is Deacon Jackson. They live in a small room in his house and pay a small amount of rent. Deacon tells Bernard that he should find a job in a factory, but Bernard is serious and wants to work in the real estate business in Los Angeles. Deacon makes fun of this idea. Later, when Bernard goes to put his son to bed, Deacon tries to give Eunice some advice about her husband, but Eunice stands up for Bernard and tells her uncle that her husband is a genius. Bernard overhears this talk between Eunice and Deacon, but they do not know he is listening. After that, Bernard promises Eunice that he will take her and their son out of that small barn-like room as soon as he can. The next day, Bernard drives Deacon's son, Tony Jackson, to his job. There, he meets a young white man named Matt Steiner. Matt jokes with Tony and says he did not know Tony had a rich cousin. Bernard tells Matt that he is not rich at all. Matt points to Bernard's car and says that if he has a car, then he is rich in Matt's eyes. After this, Bernard looks at all the properties for sale in the city and tries to get the prices lowered. He finds an apartment building that he can buy, but the building needs a lot of repairs, and his money is only enough to buy the building itself. Eunice is surprised that Bernard wants to buy property in a white neighborhood. Bernard does not care about that. He explains that black neighborhoods are too crowded and are full to the limit. He believes that these areas will have to grow and expand into other places anyway. Eunice then tells him she can find someone to give them money. She takes Bernard to a jazz club called The Plantation. The owner is an old friend of hers, a black man named Joe Morris, who lives a flashy life. During their talk, Joe shows off and makes jokes about Bernard. Bernard gets very angry and quickly leaves the club. He tells Eunice that he will not work with a man like that, and he does not want to borrow money from him. But Eunice says that even though Joe acts big and proud, he is actually a good and trustworthy man. She also says Joe knows the city mayor. Still, Bernard is not happy and does not want to believe Eunice. He has no other choice, so he goes to see the owner of the building, whose name is Patrick Barker. He wants to try to bring the price down. Patrick Barker turns out to be a very smart businessman who speaks with a strong Irish accent. He wants $40,000 for the building. Bernard tries hard to lower the price to $30,000, but he cannot do it. So he asks Patrick if they can split the payment into two parts. He will pay $30,000 right away and the other $10,000 later after the building is fully rented out. Bernard explains to Patrick that if the building is fixed up and made nicer, Patrick will get more money in the long run. But Patrick says his current tenants will not pay more rent, even if the floors are so clean they can see their own reflections. Bernard then says that there is another group of people who will pay. He talks about black doctors, lawyers, and teachers who are looking for a place to live outside the poor areas they have been pushed into. Bernard says that no one else is trying to sell to these people, but he can do it. Patrick is impressed by Bernard's strong arguments and his skill with numbers, but he is not ready to take such a risk, so he says no to Bernard. As Bernard is about to leave, he takes a quick look at a calendar on the wall. He sees the name of the bank and also the name of the personal manager who works there. After that same afternoon, Bernard goes straight to the bank to speak with the manager, but the secretary tells him a clear lie right to his face. She acts polite, but it is obvious she just wants to get rid of him because of his skin color. She says she is sorry, but Mr. Reed is not in the office. She asks if she can take a message. Bernard, however, can see Mr. Reed sitting right there at his desk. He tells the secretary that his eyesight is quite good and he can clearly read the nameplate on the desk. The secretary feels embarrassed and says she made a mistake. She then tells Bernard that Mr. Reed cannot see him right now, but she can still take a message. Bernard stays polite and says there is no message to leave, so Bernard has no choice but to wait outside the bank for the manager. He stands on the street for several hours. After the workday ends, Bernard finally talks to Mr. Reed outside the building. He tries to get a loan and tells the manager about the whole property deal, but he uses Patrick Barker's name for it. That evening, Bernard feels like giving up, but then Patrick calls him and starts the conversation in an angry tone. Patrick asks if Bernard used his name to try and get a loan from Mr. Reed at Mid-City Bank. Bernard says yes, that is true. Patrick then asks if Bernard thinks he followed normal business rules. Bernard has no answer, so he simply says no. Patrick says that at least they can agree on that one thing. But then he gives Bernard some good news. The bank manager will approve the loan because Patrick is ready to act as Bernard's guarantor. Bernard asks Patrick why he would do such a thing. Patrick replies that he is impressed by Bernard's determination. He now believes that a man with such drive can truly succeed in business. Bernard becomes very happy. After the deal is done, Eunice takes Bernard to Joe Morris's jazz club to celebrate this small win. At the club, Joe comes up to Bernard and tries to start a conversation in his usual showy way, beginning with some small talk. But Bernard is not in the mood to chat. Joe keeps trying and wants to lift his spirits. He then asks Bernard to step outside for a drink with him. Once outside, Joe tells Bernard that he is not actually a bad person and he wants to make things right between them. Joe admits that he likes to see black people do well, and he can see the qualities of a successful man in Bernard. Later, Bernard and Tony are doing some small repair work inside the building. Suddenly, a tenant named Mrs. Cooper notices them. She asks with curiosity what they are doing there. Then she starts to complain and argue with Bernard. But during their talk, Bernard explains to her that he is the one who bought the building. Mrs. Cooper gets upset and tells Bernard not to talk back to her in a rude way. She says in a harsh tone that this is a white building and Bernard cannot own it. Bernard stays quiet and does not respond, and Mrs. Cooper walks away. The next day, Matt joins Bernard and Tony at the building. Bernard asks Matt if he is fine with working for him, since Matt is white. Matt replies by saying that the only color he cares about is the color of money, and that is all that matters to him. The three of them start working hard together. But only a few hours later, the police show up. They say that an old woman named Mrs. Cooper called them because a black man is pretending to be the owner of the building. Bernard tells the police that he is actually the real owner, but they make fun of him and do not believe him. Bernard then shows them a copy of the title deed. The police are shocked and cannot believe what they see. Soon they leave, but not before rudely telling Bernard to show more respect to his tenants. Bernard politely says he understands and acknowledges them. In the evening, Bernard moves into one of the empty apartments. This makes Mrs. Cooper very angry. She does not want to live near black people at all. So the very next day, she packs up and moves out of her apartment. But her place does not stay empty for long. Very soon, a well-off black woman moves in and rents that apartment. A few days later, Bernard gives Patrick the remaining money that he owes. Patrick is very impressed by Bernard. He offers Bernard a new partnership deal. Patrick suggests they buy up more houses using his good reputation at the bank. They will split all the profits equally, 50-50. Since Patrick is Irish, Americans do not always like to do business with him, so he suggests that Bernard handle all the negotiations over the phone. Bernard has great speaking skills. He is very good at bargaining, and most importantly, he is excellent with numbers. But whenever they need someone to show up in person to sign a deal, Patrick will be the one to do it. Bernard likes this idea right away, and they shake hands on it. Over time, they buy a huge number of houses all across the area, and their business starts to grow fast. Bernard buys a nice and decent house for Eunice. All their properties are rented out to people who can pay on time, and Bernard's business is doing very well. Just when everything was going well, Patrick suddenly passed away. His death marked the start of difficult times for Bernard. After Patrick died, his wife, Margaret Barker, wanted to buy out Bernard's share of the business. She had no interest in running things with a black man. She offered him a price that was 4 times less than what the properties were actually worth. Bernard knew he owned half of the houses, but their agreement was only made verbally. That meant the woman could choose to pay him nothing at all. So Bernard was left with 2 options. He could take whatever she gave him, or he could try to take her to court and risk ending up with absolutely nothing. To find someone who could confirm their deal, Bernard went to the bank manager, but the manager refused to see him because he was already working with Margaret. Bernard understood that he had nothing to gain there, so he started walking toward the exit. As he reached the door, he noticed a sign that listed all the companies renting offices in that building. Most of them were banks. This gave him a bold and almost impossible idea. He thought about buying the whole building. That way, no one in that place would ever dare to ignore him again. His pride was hurt, and this strong feeling made him put aside his old prejudices and personal rules. He decided to go and ask Joe Morris for help. Bernard offered Joe a deal to buy the building together. He pointed out that Joe already owned several commercial buildings in black neighborhoods and understood that type of real estate well. But Joe was a sharp businessman and did not want to step into white territory. He told Bernard that there was not a single black-owned building in all of downtown Los Angeles. Joe asked Bernard to give him a good reason to join. Bernard explained that if they owned that building, the banks inside would not be able to refuse them so easily. Also, those banks had a lot of information about properties, which would make it easier for them to find and evaluate new investment opportunities. Joe liked the idea. Of course, no white owner would sell a building to black people, and they would not even agree to talk with them. So they decided to make Matt their front man. Matt was frightened by the proposal and said he could not handle such a big role. He got upset and walked out. Joe looked at Matt and did not believe he could be of any help, but Bernard was confident that Matt could be taught and trained properly. Sometime later, Matt was sitting in a cafe, thinking. A waitress named Susie came up to him. She recognized him from school. Susie told Matt that he was a few years ahead of her. She flirted with him and said that everyone in school knew who he was. Susie seemed quite interested in Matt. During their talk, Matt mentioned that he had been offered a partnership in the real estate business. Matt was just a simple factory worker, but he felt really proud when he shared this with Susie. She started speaking to him with more respect. This This moment played a big part in Matt's final choice. He became full of excitement. Matt thought for a short while, then rushed back to Bernard and Joe and quickly told them he was in. Joe still looked doubtful, but Bernard was very pleased. Bernard began to teach Matt all the small details about how rich people live. Joe taught him how to play golf and how to have conversations with wealthy people. Bernard tried to explain the formulas and calculations used to value properties. But when he saw Matt's blank expression, he realized he had to start with the very basics. Bernard told Matt they would begin with a review of simple math. Matt agreed. At first, Matt did not do well, and this disappointed Joe. He thought they would never be able to turn Matt into a worthy representative in just 1 month. But slowly, Matt started to show a great ability to learn, thanks to his excellent memory. After a month, Matt could easily do complex math problems without even stopping his game of golf. This made Bernard very happy. Joe set up a game for Matt at a top golf club in the city. He carefully planned for Matt to meet the owner of that big building, a man named Charles Renault. Renault invited Matt to play around, which was exactly what Matt wanted. Matt started off wonderfully, and both Joe and Bernard watched from a distance. They were amazed by Matt's very first shot, but they were not the only ones impressed. Renault also thought Matt was a wealthy gentleman and asked him to come to his office for lunch and a business talk. After the game with Renault, Bernard, Eunice, and Joe began to get Matt ready for the meeting. Bernard went over all the bargaining tactics, the possible prices, and the different offers Matt could make. But Matt could not handle such difficult math on his own, so he simply memorized every combination by heart using his great memory. During the meeting with Renault, Matt showed that he understood all the financial details of the building very well. He surprised Renault by giving him many calculations. Renault was amazed and asked Matt how he could do all that in his head. Even Renault's accountant, who had a calculating machine, could not keep up with Matt. Matt repeated everything exactly as Bernard had taught him. He was so careful in his presentation that he even mentioned that it was November and the sun set by 5 o'clock. He told Renault that if he wanted to sell the building, all the empty spaces needed to have lights shining by 4:30. Then Matt gave Renault 2 choices, just as Bernard had instructed. Renault felt overwhelmed, and in the end, he had no option but to agree to Matt's terms. Later, Joe, Bernard, and Matt celebrated their win. They immediately began buying houses in white neighborhoods, using the good loans they could now get. The bank manager, who had always ignored Bernard, was left confused about how things had turned out. They reached very high levels in the real estate market. They owned 177 buildings, and some of these had more than 100 apartments each. The huge amount of property they owned in areas that were only for white people made them very important in the fight against housing segregation in Los Angeles. They even personally welcomed the vice president of the country inside their own building. Matt also married the waitress he liked, Susie. In 1963, Bernard was already a very successful businessman. He went back to his small hometown in Texas to see his father. At that time, Texas was the most extreme state, and the way white people treated black people had not changed at all. Bernard's father told him he was proud of his son. Bernard said that it was easier for black people to live in California, but his father replied that he did not think Texas was like California. Even so, his father's words gave Bernard encouragement. The next day, Bernard went for a walk around his town with his son. They were both wearing expensive suits. His son was surprised that people stared at them so much. Bernard explained to his son that this place was very different from California. They walked up to the mainland bank, the same bank where Bernard used to shine shoes and learned so much. He asked the local shoe shine boy how much a shine cost, but the boy said he only did white folks. This moment once again pushed the determined businessman to think bigger. That evening, Bernard told his wife Eunice that he wanted to buy the bank. He wanted black people in Texas to have a chance at a decent life. All the banks in Texas created unfair loan conditions for black people with very high interest rates. This made it impossible for them to get loans and violated their constitutional rights. Eunice understood that if Bernard had set his mind on something, he would see it through to the end. When Bernard got back to Los Angeles, he tried to convince Joe to join this new plan, but Joe said it looked more like charity for black people than a real business move. Also, under the rules in Texas, they could not even enter their own bank to supervise Matt because black people were only allowed inside as workers or servants. Still, Joe could see that Bernard was going to do this with or without his help, so he agreed to go along with this crazy idea. They brought Matt to a meeting with the bank owner, Robert Florence. Joe went with Matt, but he pretended to be just a chauffeur. The bank owner was willing to sell his business for the price they had agreed on, but he had one condition. His son, Robert Florence Jr., had to stay on at the bank as a credit expert, and the owner would keep 20% of the shares. Everyone was ready to finalize the deal, but the son was not happy and started asking difficult questions. He wanted to know why Matt's partners, Bernard Garrett and Joseph Morris, were not at the meeting. Matt replied that his financial partners were back in Los Angeles. He added that they were too rich to bother with such things, which was why they sent him instead. Even with Florence Jr.'s troubled questions, the deal went through, and the three partners successfully took over the bank. Bernard immediately went to the black preachers in Texas. He told them that he and his partners had bought the mainland bank to change how it gave loans to black people. He asked for their help in finding responsible borrowers from their congregations. He also stressed that everyone had to keep this a secret. Bernard Bernard then made dozens of loans to black people for their homes and businesses. The borrowers thanked him and said their earnings had doubled during that time. But Florence Jr., who had hoped to take over as the boss from his father, started bothering Matt about all these new loans. He wanted to know how Matt was deciding to approve money for these people. Then, Florence Jr. began spying on Matt. He discovered that the new loans were going to black people, and he noticed Matt secretly meeting with Bernard to report on his work. That evening, Matt's wife Susie confronted him. She was not happy about moving to Texas. She was also upset because Matt did not actually own the bank himself, as he had originally told her. He was just a front for his black partners. Matt tried to explain that he was making $25,000 a year. He had even bought a house with just 1 month's salary. But Susie insisted that Matt had started this journey with Joe and Bernard, and they had promised to make him a real partner. Matt promised her that the next bank they bought would be completely under his control. But the idea of buying another bank in Texas only made Susie more frustrated. The next day, Florence Jr. followed the trio and found their meeting place. He broke into Bernard's house and threatened to tell everyone in the town who really owned the bank and who was getting the loans. He said that all the white people would rush to take their money out and the bank would fall apart. Bernard tried to reason with him. He said that if that happened, Florence Jr. would own 20% of a failed bank instead of a successful one, so it was in his own interest to stay quiet. But Florence Jr. replied that his father did not know he was selling his bank to 2 black men, and that made it fraud. Joe and Bernard told him that both of their names were on the bank contract when his father signed it, but Florence Jr. pulled out a notice from the comptroller of the currency. It said that their yearly inspection had been moved up by 2 quarters because someone had sent an anonymous tip. After Florence Jr. left, Matt spoke up. His wife Susie had been pushing him, and he suggested that the partners buy another bank, a small one. He said they could move all the loans for black people to that new bank. He had already found a bank and worked out all the details for the deals. But Bernard said the Bank of Marlin was too small. He pointed out that they could not buy it outright for $274,000. Matt explained to Joe and Bernard that this was a good solution, but Bernard was careful and did not like such a risky move. He knew they would not be able to manage another bank on top of everything else. Matt demanded that they put the new bank completely under his control, but Joe and Bernard were not willing to do that. Bernard said it was $274,000 of his and Joe's money. Matt became direct with them. He said that if he could not be his own boss there, then he thought he should resign and go back to Los Angeles. Joe got angry and asked Matt if he was trying to blackmail them. Matt said no. He told them that Joe and Bernard had taught him so much, and now he just wanted to be more like them. He wanted to be an owner. In the end, Matt succeeded in getting control of the new bank by putting pressure on them. Bernard asked Eunice to work as a cleaner at the new bank. This was a cover so she could keep an eye on Matt. Matt never liked this and complained to Eunice that he wished they would just trust him more. Bernard made a list of loans that needed to be moved to the new bank. He told Matt to double-check every loan before signing and to only work with their trusted lawyer. But Matt had started to believe in his own skills and powers. He decided to go away from their plan. He hired a lawyer based on advice from Florence Jr., who had most likely been the one to report the bank to the comptroller of the currency. When Matt was signing the contracts, he looked serious, but he just went through the list of loan agreements quickly without studying them properly. Matt was worried that he might mess up the bank's management, so he shared these thoughts with Susie. But Susie told him they were lucky to have him. Matt said no, he was the lucky one, and he was learning from people much smarter than him. Florence Jr. called Bernard and told him that white customers were coming to the mainland bank and pulling out all their money. Someone had told them that the bank was giving loans to black people. On top of that, an examiner from the comptroller of the currency started an inspection at the new bank, also because of an anonymous tip. Matt called Bernard in a panic and told him that a federal bank examiner had just left his office. Bernard said he thought that was not supposed to happen until next month, but Matt explained that he was talking about the Marlin Bank, not the mainland bank. Matt told Bernard that the examiner was coming back in an hour. Bernard was shocked. He quickly put on a janitor's uniform and went to help Matt. He tried to explain to the examiner how the transactions at their bank worked, but it did not help much because the examiner found loans that such a small bank should not have. Matt ran out to his partners in the restroom to ask for guidance. Bernard could not understand how those loans ended up in that bank. Matt lied and said he had looked over every single loan carefully. Joe and Bernard got very angry and asked Matt who exactly had recommended that lawyer. When Matt said Florence Jr., both Joe and Bernard were shocked. They yelled at Matt for being so foolish. Joe and Bernard understood perfectly that Florence Jr. had set this up on purpose. They were deeply troubled that Matt could not see it for himself. After the inspection, the partners decided to sell the small bank in order to protect the mainland bank. But Matt was not ready to give up the bank, where he was finally in charge of everything. Matt kept making mistakes. He bought back the loans using the mainland bank's name. Joe found out about this from their trusted banker in Los Angeles, who they had worked with for years. Joe and Bernard rushed to the mainland bank to stop Matt. But just as they were explaining to Matt how badly he had messed up, the deputy comptroller of the currency burst into the bank. He announced that their banking license had been taken away because of suspicious transactions, and the bank was being placed under FDIC control. As they walked out of the bank, they were caught and arrested by the FBI. Bernard tried to resist, but it did not help. In Washington, before a public hearing in the Senate, their lawyer, Melvin Belli, spoke to them. He said that the government wanted to use their case to change the laws about banks banking. He explained that they were being used to tighten control on banks. In other words, they wanted to make an example out of Bernard. Meanwhile, Senator McLennan, who was a strong racist, talked to Matt alone. He told Matt that he needed to put all the blame on his partners, Joe and Bernard. That way, Matt would not end up in jail for 50 years. Matt did exactly that at the first hearing. He admitted that he had been manipulated and that his partners were the ones pulling the strings. He said all the deals were made by him under pressure from Bernard. Next, Senator McLennan spoke to Bernard. He told Bernard to confess that he had purposely used a loophole in the law to make money illegally. He said that if Bernard did that, Congress would fix the laws to favor white people and Bernard would go free. But if Bernard chose to take his case to court and talk about racial discrimination, he would face jail time. McLennan spoke to Bernard in a rude way. He said he was from Arkansas, so Bernard did not need to tell him that black people sometimes got treated unfairly. The second day of the hearing arrived. Bernard pulled out his janitor's uniform and held it up. He said that this was the only way black people could enter a bank in Texas, even though the Constitution said all citizens were equal. Senator McLennan tried hard to interrupt Bernard's speech, but Bernard gave a powerful talk about racial discrimination. He asked the panel why it was so important for them to keep an entire race of people away from the American dream. Of course, the Senate was not happy with his speech. The federal government took away all of Bernard and Joe's assets. After the hearing, an all-white jury in Texas found them guilty of misusing bank funds and sentenced them to 3 years in federal prison. Matt, on the other hand, stayed free. Florence Jr. bought the Mainland Bank in a sale arranged by the FDIC. He paid only a small fraction of what Bernard and Joe had paid to his father for it. 3 years after their testimony before the Senate, Congress passed the Fair Housing Act. This made it against the law to refuse to sell or rent property based on race, religion, or gender. 3 years later, Bernard was released from prison. Joe and Eunice were there to meet him. Joe had been freed a few days earlier and made a joke with him. The two men were very happy that they had gotten off with a light sentence. But Eunice did not understand why they were so cheerful, since they were now bankrupt. Then Bernard admitted that before the first hearing, Matt had called him. Matt confessed that the senator had pressured him and he would have to testify against Bernard. Bernard then asked Matt for one favor. He asked him to sell some of their assets and buy 2 mansions in the Bahamas for him and Joe. Matt had done that for them. So Joe, Bernard, and Eunice drive away happily. And that is the end of the story. If you liked this video, please press the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to this channel. See you in the next video.